for North America, cops are in the news because they are the story. But what's going on behind the headlines? Today on Context, we re-examine our faith in police. Public perception, it's a tricky topic in recent years with police, so our first guests are here to help us understand the evolving relationship between police and the public. And who better than the man that investigates complaints against police services in Ontario? Please welcome Jerry McNeely to Context. Jerry, thanks for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
Also joining us on the big screen from Ottawa is Gregory Brown. He's a former police officer. He's also a PhD candidate at Carleton University who is studying the impact of mobile technology on policing. Gregory, hello to you.
Good evening to you as well.
Jerry, I want to start with you. We've seen major backlash in the U.S. towards police since 2012, since the Trayvon Martin shooting, since the Black Lives Matter campaign, even in pop culture with Beyonce's new video, Formation, it's calling out the police. What kind of an effect has that had on trust issues with police here in Canada?
Well, I think overall it has created a sense in members of the public that maybe there's something going on with the trust and confidence that we should have in police. And it has increased people's vigilance in that area. We're getting more complaints that's more detailed. And I think people are paying attention to what they're seeing on TV and what they're reading in the papers, in the media. And as a result, I think it is diminishing some trust and confidence in police and policing generally. But my job is to try to turn that around.
Yeah. Gregory, on that note, I'm going to bring you into the conversation.
Sure.
Everyone these days has a camera phone. How is citizen surveillance, affecting police officers' conduct?
Today's police officer on the front lines are acutely aware of the potential for them to be video recorded basically at all times, not only through camera phones, but through CCTV that you see now in primarily urban environments. Almost every business, every public building has CCTV cameras aimed out into the public environment. So this is something officers are extremely aware of, and for the most part they conduct themselves with an understanding that whatever they do will be potentially video recorded, or more than likely be captured by video recording.
Does that change, though, the way that officers view the public? It's like somebody's always watching them.
What the police are doing, and I completely agree with Jerry on the transparency piece. I think transparency is something that is obviously required in today's policing, and I think it dovetails with police accountability as well. So on the racial aspect, I don't have any data to discuss that in a Canadian context, but it is certainly a live issue. The border is an artificial border between Canada and the U.S. American news and American policing incidents cross the border seamlessly into Canada. And it certainly is in the consciousness of a lot of police officers that work in our diverse cities and with communities of color in the Canadian centres.
I want to bring one of my co-hosts, Sheldon Neal, into the conversation. He, like myself, is a visible minority here in Canada, has grown up here. For you that have grown up here, Sheldon, is this mistrust a race issue?
Molly, this is definitely a subject that touches close to home, and I think there are two elements to consider in this. One, no matter what one's racial background may be, one should live their life, I believe, in a way that doesn't give a reason for law enforcement to turn the spotlight on them in the first place. And that could be achieved by, obviously, obeying the law, doing something, and living in actions that do not cause suspicion on the way of law enforcement to turn attention to you. But also, I believe there's something else that has to be considered, and that there's a burden of responsibility on police, law enforcement, to enforce the law in a way that is integral, just, and not something that seems corrupt or something that is tainted. Because when one police officer operates in this way, it taints the entire system. And then you fall into issues of mistrust, issues that bubble over from there. So I believe there is a burden of responsibility on both parties to manage here. The citizen, both you and I here, as well as those in seats of power in law enforcement.
Thank you, Sheldon. My last question to you, gentlemen, Gregory, we'll start with you. What are some of the positives that might come out of this public scrutiny of police?
Well, I think that the police will embrace this idea of accountability and its conflation with transparency and visibility. So I think that what I see for the future of policing is a police environment where The police actions in the community are much more transparent, and there will have to be an accompanying educational piece around this. And I'm fairly confident Jerry will agree with me on this, that the public has to be educated to coincide with this new availability of police actions in the field. So they have to understand more completely what use of force is about. What are the police legally entitled to do in certain circumstances? Because of course, just because a police officer uses force, and it may not look particularly attractive, as former Chief Blair of Toronto Police said when I interviewed him, you know, if a large police officer punches somebody in the nose, there's going to be blood. It's not going to look particularly attractive on a video recording, but that doesn't mean that that use of force was inappropriate. So I think the public needs to understand that police are authorized to use force in certain circumstances. Of course, the force has to be proportional to what's happening. And I don't think police generally resist that sort of idea. But I think the public needs to become more educated about specifically what the police do, what the rules are, what their entitlements are, and what is appropriate or inappropriate use of force. And of course, Jerry's organization is the leading authority on what's appropriate and inappropriate.
Jerry?
Well, you know, I agree with some of the comments Greg is making because it comes to accountability and transparency. And when I talk about transparency, Molly, I'm also talking about openness. And Greg talked about that. Police need to be open to let the public know what its job is all about. For too long, police have operated in the shadows. What the public is asking for now, and what civilian oversight is going to bring, is that openness, that transparency, and that accountability. Here's what a police job is all about. Here's how a police carries out his or her duties. And if the public knows that, then I think what your colleague referred to about earlier could actually be accomplished. If the public knows exactly what the police job is, then it makes a big difference about how they will interact in turn with the public. And just to go back to a question about the racialized thing, I don't think we're seeing it in Toronto. Greg is correct, or in Canada to a great extent, but there are pockets of it. It's in Toronto, it's in North, it's in Thunder Bay, it's in different places, and that's when police have to operate in a colorblind or a diversity blind manner, treat everybody the same way as they would like to be treated.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
My pleasure.
That is Jerry McNeely, is the head of the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, and Gregory Brown is a retired police officer currently working on his PhD at Carleton University. Now to Winnipeg, where Police Chief Devon Clunas had some very different issues of trust to rebuild with his city. Now, his critics were worried his outspoken faith in God could be dangerous to common sense safety. Now, Lorna caught up with Chief Clunas in Winnipeg.
Winnipeg's Police Chief Devon Clunas announced his retirement in early March 2016, and we thought that would be a great time to hear what was on his mind in his final days in office. You are the police chief who made national headlines because you did tell citizens to pray. Do you regret that?
Never. I have a situation now, and here's the most profound thing that came out of that. Walking down the street, a gentleman approaches me and said, Chief, I'm an atheist, but I believe in what you said. It's absolutely galvanized and drawn this city together. And people regularly ask the chief of police now to pray at public events. Again, I was being authentic. Not preaching at anyone, but this is who I am. And my faith is the best part of who I am. I'm saying, why would you not want me to bring that to work?
What about the loud voices of secularism that says, please keep that at home?
I think you may always have that, but, well, here's what I will share with you. When you speak about that, you talk about the humanists, atheists, and agnostics. I am their chief as well. So I went to meet with the humanists, atheists, and agnostics of Manitoba. And I said, you know, I'm here to meet with you because I am your chief, and I'm not dressed in uniform, so you don't have to worry, I'm not packing the gun or anything. We're going to have a nice, open, honest conversation. I said, more than likely, I won't change your mind, and you won't change mine, but we have to understand one another. You need to know who I am and what I'm about. I would never tell you that you can't be a humanist, atheist, or agnostic, and you ought to be able to express yourself. So why should a person of faith not be able to also express themselves? Not that we're trying to change anyone, but we each have to be able to live out who we are. Because you know what? I pay taxes too. Christians, Muslims, Jews, all people of all faith backgrounds pay taxes as well, as do non-secular people. We need to understand, respect, and appreciate one another.
Can you remember your first policing job?
Yes, I can.
What was it?
After I graduated, started walking the beat on Main Street
Here in Winnipeg.
here in Winnipeg. So very clearly, I remember that event, walking into establishments that previously I would only drive by on the bus and just seeing people in really difficult conditions. And I remember asking myself, is this all there is? There has to be something that I can do to make a difference for these people and their lives.
And that motivated you, seeing the need, I bet, the North Strip of Winnipeg.
My job has always been about the purpose of trying to impact people's lives, whether it be individually or corporately as an entire city, and to see the outcome change for people because, as I said, this can't be all that there is for people.
One of the reasons Winnipeg has appreciated you so much is because you have taken that socio-economic outlook towards your policing. What's an example of that?
Well, the perfect example is, as I said, when you look at day one, I look at the situation that people are in, and I said to myself, nobody one day wakes up and said, I am going to be an addict, I'm going to be a drunk, I'm just going to be what people consider to be a bum on Main Street. Why are people ending up in these conditions? It's not by choice. And when I look at a lot of the young people I ended up arresting and dealing with, I would say, why? I would ask them, why are you in this situation? Most will be saying to me, I don't know. And I knew that there was something else driving what we're dealing with in terms of crime. Crime is just a symptom, but what's the real cause? As I examined that, I realized it's the social issues that are taking place in our city. And Winnipeg has some of the highest percentages of socioeconomic challenge individuals. You wonder why we have a high level of crime. It's a very easy correlation to make.
Okay, tell us, what are some of those socioeconomic conditions?
Well, you look at, you cannot ignore the historic roots of what our Indigenous people are dealing with in our city, without a shadow of a doubt. You look at the percentage of Indigenous people who are involved in crime, not because they have a greater propensity. You have to look at the past and what we're experiencing currently. And if we intend to move forward, we need to say, how are we going to change these social conditions which are putting people at risk for being involved in crime?
Were you shocked when Eastern media called Winnipeg the most racist city in Canada?
Yes, I was, because I don't believe we're the most racist city. I mean, you can only say that if you've actually did a survey of every single city. So right away, it's not the case. What I can tell you, again, because of the high challenges we have socioeconomically, certainly people might get that perception, but what they don't understand is all the work that's been done in our city and how open and receptive we are. I think part of the problem in the past was that people weren't willing to face the reality of what's taking place in our city. And so part of what I've been trying to do is really shine the light on what the real issue is. But I've discovered that once you shine the light, people are willing to hear you, and now they're addressing those issues.
You have also gone on record as the police chief that was given a rough time at the media because of your personal Christian faith.
Right.
And now just talk to us about who you are as a person. When did you first become aware that you and God had a connection?
I remember shortly after becoming a police officer, one evening shift, going home and having this very vivid dream and realizing that I'm here for a reason, for a purpose. And I remember shortly after the airliner went down on the East Coast, and it's 1998, I'm driving to a school. I was a school resource officer. People were calling in and saying there can't be a God. What kind of a God would allow this to happen? And in my vehicle, I just had a prayer. I said, God, I wish one day you'd put me in a place in the police service where I'd have the opportunity to stand up and tell people there is a God who does care for them. So I don't think I'm special, but it's just I've been determined never to deny God, no matter how high He's taken me. One day I will no longer be the chief of police, but I'll still be a Christian.
You know, with the Christian God, there is a certain amount of evangelism that Jesus invites his followers to. Mm-hmm. How have you navigated that in your life?
Absolutely. The way I've done that is just by being authentic. Even in the organization, truly, for example, I was asked to take over a division when I was an inspector that was a very challenging place that no one else wanted to go to. And so every day, I would go into my office, and certainly I would pray, and then there was a couple other Christians, and we would pray, and then I would say, no, go out and live that out. That's all. We're not preaching at anyone, we're just doing the job. And then miraculously, everything turned around in that division. And so people said, Devon, what are you doing there? Now remember, I'm not preaching at people, but I think we need to be authentic. When I told them I said, I gotta let you know we're praying there. We're praying. and they were living it out. So it's not about going out and saying, I'm going to try to convert anyone. It's just, I've always been very open and authentic. So when someone asks, okay, what's happening? Here's why. But I won't run down the street and grab you and say, hey, I got to tell you about this. But when you ask me, I am authentic.
Chief Devon Clunas, thank you very much for being with Context.
It's my pleasure.
When life in the force intersects with a life of faith, 2 New Brunswick officers are up next.
Well, New Brunswick is not always in the headlines, but when it comes to police and the public, it has been. A spate of high-profile cases, suspensions, and internal investigations have dragged the province's police services into the spotlight. Here to talk about how police officers handle internal demands is Corporal Rick Mooney, currently serving with the Fredericton Police Force. Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Very much my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
But Rick, give us an idea of what it's like to be part of a police service that is being so heavily scrutinized by the public you aim to serve and protect.
I've had a great experience so far, but I realize that we are in an organization and in a profession where there is a tremendous responsibility, and certainly when we look at public scrutiny, public criticism, what have you, in regards to misconduct or any type of activity which the public deems to be worth talking about, worth having a conversation about. I think it's important to understand that this is very closely tied to public safety, because public trust in a police force and public safety there's a close causal connection there. I think, we rely on an astute public and a sensitive public, and, a public who is careful to not draw inferences that aren't there. Obviously when there are issues of misconduct or issues that need to be dealt with, then we need to deal with them. Mm-hmm. And certainly that's what we're doing.
Rick, I think the human aspect is a good point and really important to bring up for sure. Rick, do you see policing, though, as a part of God's law enforcement structure?
Yes. I mean, Romans 13 makes that pretty clear. I think it's laid out pretty clear there, and that's when we look at the scriptural text regarding that, how all governing authorities are instituted by God, and certainly police would be a part of that. And that's just a point of interest. Part of my testimony, actually, why I got into policing was when a pastor was teaching on that particular text. So it has particular relevance for me, but there's no question that God is the ultimate authority, and He has instituted authority here on earth. Whether those authorities are using their God-given power in an appropriate way or not, we look at and consider Pontius Pilate and what Jesus said to him, that he would have no power or authority over Christ if it were not given to him from above. And so, no, there's certainly from my standpoint and viewpoint, the Scripture is very clear on that.
Mm-hmm. Rick, we're going to bring another officer into the conversation now, retired RCMP officer and chaplain Ken Smith. Ken, in June 2014, Justin Burke shot and killed 3 RCMP officers in Moncton. You were asked to offer a sort of spiritual aid in that situation. Maybe tell us a little bit about what that means.
And I had heard about this incident through social media, actually. I was sitting home and someone had emailed and said, this is what's happening. So, of course, I'm at a loss at that point. The question is, what am I to do? What can I do? There must be something I can do besides pray. Yes, and we did pray. And my wife and I are both chaplains with the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team. We've had training in that respect. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, what happened was the next day we started the process of arranging for a safe place, a safe environment for people who are affected by this tragic incident to come in and share their story. Because we felt that by them sharing their story, it would begin that path to healing.
Ken, I understand there's a wraparound prayer hug. You were talking about hugs there.
Yes.
I got to ask about that.
We set up there during that week, and on 2 nights that week we had prayer. We got the word out. Let's pray. Let's bring people together of faith and pray for the affected community, the officers, their families, and yes, even the one responsible for this incident and his family. So it was during that prayer time that God placed upon my heart the idea of a prayer hug, a prayer walk from Champlain Mall. And this was exactly what it was. It was a prayer walk that would take place from Champlain Mall. We would walk to the Kodiak RCMP, and in numbers, we would march in pairs, shoulder to shoulder. And as we got to the RCMP facility on Main Street, we would break and just surround the facility as though it was a prayer hug. And it was Captain Lee Ryan of the Salvation Army, a good partner who helped me with this prayer hug, who named it Wraparound Prayer Hug. So it was, as I think about the hug that we did as God's people, I was thinking today before I did this interview was this is actually God's hug. It was God's hug for those police officers, the civilian staff, and their families who were affected by this crime.
Very, very powerful, Ken. I understand you're both going to a conference. It's about who's got your six. Want to know a little bit more about that?
Well, actually, I belong to the Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers, and this it just seems like when we started that at the university during that incident, one thing led to another. It just kept rolling. And what happened was, as a result of that, we had a reformation, a rebirth of the Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers, which we had quite active here in the mid-1990s. But we had a rebirth of our chapter here in Moncton that was formed. And as a result, and this is all as a result of prayer, it led into the National Fellowship of Christian Peace Officers Conference that we're hosting here in June of this year. And the title of that conference is Who's Got Your Six?
Rick, I'm going to end with you here. I mean, so much of the Christian life is about restoration and healing, but it's also about accountability and honesty. How does your police force in Fredericton build this back?
Well, I think when we talk about building public trust, I mean, that's something we've been doing for a very long time. And, I think when we think about the way forward, sometimes it can be helpful to look at where we've come from. And I think about, and I always go back to this, the very foundations of modern policing come from, or in large part, come from the sayings or thoughts of a man named Robert Peel back in England in the early 19th century. And he said something very profound as he was beginning the London, what we know now as the London Metropolitan Police Force, during a time when there was a fair bit of mistrust for what would be considered a public police force. He said, police officers must at all times maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the traditional belief that the police are the public and the public are the police. The police really are just working full-time to do the duties that are incumbent on all members of society to do in the interests of public welfare and safety. And so obviously we can't take that to its full extent today because obviously we have powers that an ordinary citizen doesn't. But there's a principle there. And the principle is that we're in this together. Public safety is not just on the backs of the police. It's on everyone. It's on all of us.
We're all in this together. Nice way to end it there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and for serving and protecting and helping people heal.
Thank you.
Ken Smith is a retired RCMP chaplain joining us from Moncton, and Corporal Rick Mooney joined us from Fredericton, where he works for the local police. And Sheldon's got a question for our viewers at home on this topic. Sheldon.
Today we're asking a simple question. Why do you trust or distrust the police? We want to hear from you. Why don't you contact us by any of the means you see there on the screen, that being the telephone number, Facebook, Twitter, or email. We can't wait to read them. You talk and we listen.
How faith, education, and understanding intersect. How to bring what happens in the dark into light. That's in Lorna's Wrap, coming your way next.
All All that is secret will eventually be brought into the open, and everything that is concealed will be brought to light and made known to all. That's from the Gospel of Luke, and it is a powerful word of caution for us all, no matter the vocation. Jesus called his disciples to live beyond reproach, and that may be harder to do with camera phones around every corner, but those same devices can also be used for good. Toronto police recently launched a Hero of the Year award, and this image of one of the nominees captured on a phone says it all. It's Constable Patrick Ron of Owen Sound entering a burning building to save those trapped inside. In a world where we so often look to tear things down, it's important to recognize men and women who risk their lives every day with little or no recognition. And it's also wise to remember we're all human, we all make mistakes, and we forgive because God forgave us first. For all of us here at Context, I'm Lorna Duick. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week as we explore life beyond the headlines.
Good to see you, my friends. Well, we have much more news online at Context. Now, these are the stories you won't see on TV, but it's a daily delivery for your phone, iPad, or computer. Here's a few of them. Over 200 gathered in Ottawa at a prayer vigil for Pastor Lim, the Canadian reverend who was sentenced to life in prison in North Korea. We talked to conservative foreign affairs critic Tony Clement, who called for his release. Context caught up with Canadian spoken word artist Michael Antwi to learn more about how his faith factors into his poetry. Take a look.
There was just one day I didn't have enough money to buy something from the grocery store, and someone decided to buy it for me. He gave me a pamphlet to a church, and then from there I just felt like I was at home. I felt God speak to me, and from there I've just been trying to just share the same light that I was given.
The tragedy in La Loche shocked Canadians and brought to light the many struggles of this remote First Nations community. Well, we talked to Terry LeBlanc of Indigenous Pathways about the road to restoration. Well, you can find all of that and so much more online at contextwithlorna.com.